You are watching Your World at 10. Now, starting today, we're going to bring you examples of how businesses can make green pay. Today, we focus on ITC, the only company of its size that claims to be carbon positive, water positive, and that recycles most of its solid waste. ITC says that's thanks to its triple bottom line approach. Well, the best illustration is its paper business. To explain how ITC paper makes green pay, the theme of today's show, I'm joined by Pradeep Dhobale, the CEO of ITC's Paper Boards and Specialty Papers business. Pradeep, thanks very much for joining us. Let me start by asking you to explain the details of this project.
Now, it all began in mid-80s. The traditional model for paper industry was to set up the factories near the forest area. The government would extract the raw material from the forest and give it to the companies for a fee. And that royalty money was to be used for reforestation. Now, over a period, what happened was, since this was not done very efficiently, there was not, forest cover was dwindling, and therefore, because of environmental pressures, slowly the realization dawned upon both the government and the companies that raw material is not available from forestry resources. So we had two choices at that time. When the government declined to supply raw material to the paper companies, including ITC, we had an option of importing pulp and producing paper in India, because the paper demand in the country was growing in any case. The other option was to go abroad and set up your pulping operations there. But both these options would result into is export of jobs from India. The paper mills are fairly modern, and the job creation there is, I would say, modest. The real job creation happens in the supply chain, in the forestry, what we call agroforestry. And those jobs would get created in the countries, whether it is Africa or ASEAN countries, where the forestry rules and regulations are more industry friendly. That's where the job creation would happen. So I call it export of jobs. So when we analyzed this situation, we said, is there any other option that we can follow? And we came out with this idea because at that time, as per the National Forest Policy or Forest Conservation Act, it was not allowed for corporates to enter the forest areas to do their forestation. So we went to the farming community. ITC, because of its background, knew the farmers very well, the farmer psyche very well. So we went to the farmers and said, will you do pulpwood plantations for us? It was not easy because there were two major hurdles. One is the yield from the pulpwood plantations with the technology which was available at that time were not remunerative for the farmer. And the trees used to take 7 years to grow. That means the farmer will get his return only after 7 years. So these two hurdles had to be crossed. So ITC invested heavily in biotechnology-based research and development and came out with what we call clones, which would allow much higher productivity on the farmlands, on marginal farmlands, and the figures are 3 to 5 times more than what was happening with the traditional plantations of this type. Now, this increase in productivity started giving remunerative return to the farmer, even if it meant he had to wait for 5 to 7 years. The other technological breakthrough that we got, we brought down the rotation cycle from 7 years to 4 years. Today it stands at 4 years, and some people are cutting even in 3 years. Which means the farmer was getting his remuneration every 4 years or 3.5 to 4 years, and it was giving adequate return because of the yield of the per hectare had gone substantially higher.
Well, that's an interesting story. Pradeep, how much of your raw material supply do these plantations meet? Did you have to offer financial assistance to the farmers to convert? Because I get the long-term supply chain stability, but what about the costs?
That's a lot of questions, Menika. Let me take them one by one. Our current requirement of raw material is 100% met through these plantations. So we do not take a single ton of bamboo or wood from the traditional forest resources. In fact, we have 8 times more standing crop today than what we require. So my annual harvesting, what we call, is of the order of 10 to 12,000 hectares, and we have more than 100,000 hectares of standing plantation, which means it is sufficient to meet our requirements of future growth, or the farmers can supply it to other paper companies or other wood-based companies as well. You are absolutely right, the upfront costs were there, because all this research and development and convincing the farmer took almost a decade. And initially, all these expenses had to be borne by ITC. So we have two programs today. One is called social forestry and other is called farm forestry. In the social forestry program, ITC picks up all the cash costs, which is the cost of the planting stock, the cost of fertilizers, etc., etc. All the costs are picked up by ITC, and the farmer is contributing only from his land and from his labor. So this program is reserved only for below poverty line farmers who are having less than 2 acres kind of land. So that's a program which is fully funded by ITC. Over the years, we have spent close to 18 crores on this kind of investment for this social forestry program. Now the other side of it, which is farm forestry, which is a completely commercial operation, where we sell the planting stock, we sell the technical know-how for plantation to the farmers who are relatively better placed, who have the wherewithal. Now when the farming community has seen the returns from this kind of plantations, they have come forward, and today I would say out of our 100,000 hectares, about 15% to 20% is through the social forestry route, where ITC has funded it substantially. Whereas the balance, 80% almost, is completely on a commercial scale.
Pradeep, can you give me a cost comparison? Like, for instance, what if you were to import pulp instead of this whole plantation, strategy, and would that be cheaper in any fashion, pulp that is imported?
See, when we started this exercise, when I mentioned the background, when the forest raw material was not available to us, at that time there was a clear option of importing pulp and setting up only paper machines in India. As the thing stood at that moment of time, the pulp was actually cheaper. It was possible to import pulp, convert it into paper here and still make profit. And some of our industry colleagues have taken that option, or they have gone overseas and set up plantations in other countries. But we did not do that because we were looking at long-term sustainability. And if I take a 10-year average, paper is a cyclical business, pulp production is also a cyclical business. So if I take a cycle average, there is a benefit coming to the business by having these plantations within, I would say, 50 to 100 kilometers radius of your factory.
Any numbers as to how this has helped your profitability or margins, Pradeep?
Certainly. Now, for an initiative which is taking, 1 to 1.5 decades, it is very difficult to make comparison, what your margins were 15 years back and what your margins are today. But suffices it to say that in last 10 years, backed up with these plantations, it has given us muscle power to invest more in this area. And from a turnover of 300 crores by end of 90s or in year 2000, this year we are ending with a turnover of 2,800 crores or so.
Okay, I understand, Pradeep, that other industries like construction, furniture, they too stand to benefit from plantations of this nature. As you have pointed out to me in our offline conversations, some of the farmers are also planting other crops in between the trees. But let me concentrate a little bit on the potential negative impacts. For instance, are you diverting land from regular agricultural practices to plantations? Because that could become a cause for concern if some of these projects were to become big enough to impact food crop cycles in any fashion. So can you help share that information with us?
Menaka, worldwide this concern is there, where on one side you have food security and energy security issues, which is an additional dimension, and then we're talking about pulpwood plantation. But the good news is we are not going to the places where the traditional agriculture is very successful. We are actually going to marginal lands. Typically these are degraded forest lands which have been given on lease to the tribals, and they are not able to grow anything else on this land which is kind of remunerative for them. Those are the kind of lands we are targeting. Fortunately for us, we have developed pulpwood species which require very little rainfall, and that kind of agroclimatic conditions where the traditional agriculture is not very healthy. And there is plenty of this available. As per one statistics, the country has almost 33 million hectares of degraded forest land. And India's target of reaching at least 33% forest cover from the current 22-23%, which means 10% more forest cover, it allows ample scope for doing these kind of plantations on degraded forest land.
What about water requirements of plantations like these? I mean, does it put any strain on the water table?
We have done studies on this, and I admit that 15 years back there used to be a comment that these fast-growing species of pulpwood plantations take a lot of water from the soil. But we have scientifically proved, and we have endorsements from organizations like FAO, that these clonal plantations, where the roots are not going very deep into the soil, typical clonal plantations, the root is going only to 1 to 1.5 meter depth, It is not really reaching the subsoil water, and therefore the question of drawing more water from the land and later on getting into some problems does not arise. And I would also like to mention that many of our farmers, after taking a couple of crops of pulpwood plantations, have thought of going back to agriculture. A particular agriculture product, when the prices are high, the farmer wants to go for that plantation. And they have done that, and they have not found any problem.
No, it's interesting you point that out because a lot of, environmentalists have concerns about the kind of strain clonal plantations put both on the land as well as the water table. Final question, Pradeep. There seems to be an additional silver lining to this project. You also earn CERs or climate credits, right, from this?
Finally, we are very happy that UNFCCC has registered one of our projects, which covers about 3,000 hectares of plantation, involving a very large number of farmers. And because of this registration, the next step is validation and verification, and because of which we will earn 57,000 CERs per year. And as per my estimate, we will be able to pay to the extent of 7,500 rupees per hectare to the farmers who are participating in this program. Now that's an additional income to the farmer, and ITC has gone on record stating that this money, when it comes, it will be distributed among the farming communities. It will not be taken as a profit for ITC.
All right, Pradeep Dhobale, that's all the time we have, but pleasure talking to you, and let's hope it does turn out to be the win-win situation that you point out it is. It's time with that for a quick break on Your World at 10. We will